Good morning. My name is Rebecca Bingham, and I'd like to welcome you to the Hot Springs Unitarian Universalist Church. Ordinarily, I am thrilled to be sharing music, which I've done by video today, and I'm also bringing you a message because I will be live with our sister church in Hot Springs Village this morning during your service. An important topic I wanted to introduce as a result of a conversation we had at the board meeting last month, and that is, how can we be of service moving forward as our new president is inaugurated in January? We are moving along with recommendations and decisions that we've made about how to incorporate anti-racism programming into our church calendar. And today is sort of a way to circle around the edge of that and find a way to bring it closer into practical experience. As most of you know, I've said over and over again, I teach best what I need to learn most. And this principle of speaking peace as a way of communicating without alienating the person that I'm speaking to is something that I want to get better at. I've made some serious blunders in the last 4 weeks with my own son that I shared with you around Thanksgiving. So my goal is not only to make this applicable in my own life, but to be able to pass it along and to practice with you and other people that might join us for an extended teaching on this subject. To introduce why we feel like, as a church, that it's so important, I'm going to use some words by John Pavlovitz, who is a minister and a blogger, and he expresses in such vivid language what many of us are feeling is alienation from people who have been lifelong friends, or in my case, some of my own family members. He mourns the fact that as much as we try to understand friendship funerals or relationship funerals, in our head, it still hurts in the heart. It doesn't explain how once rational, what we thought were otherwise decent, educated people seem to have fully taken leave of their senses. People that we've grown up with and served on mission trips with, or families who've had our kids over for sleepovers, older relatives that we've known for decades. All of these folks comprise a rapidly growing army of people that we thought, surely they know better than this. Unfortunately, they are thinking the same thing about us. While we complain that they have fully rejected science, that they are embracing conspiracy theories, explosions of racism, nothing seems to fully connect the dots to how we got here. It doesn't explain how we lost people that we loved and respected. It doesn't explain the pain of these separations. It doesn't make it easier for us to mourn the loss of living people. And it certainly doesn't comfort me at relationship funerals. As much as I am in mourning over the situation between my son and me right now, I know that he is probably thinking the same thing about me, lamenting the ways that I have failed to meet his expectations or to fulfill his needs for family. Perhaps that I've even betrayed the religion that I taught him. And he's wondering how he lost me. Even more devastating is the story that we're not telling right now, the one far below the trending news headlines. America has a clear series of compound fractures of partisan battles, issue differences, loud tribalism, and attention-stealing sideshow press. We're not just being pulled apart along political lines, but the fragile, time-woven fabric of our society is pulling apart at the seams. Marriages, families, lifelong relationships, faith communities, and social circles that have survived every previous assault from within and without seem to be under particular strain when we pile the pandemic on top of it. So, in a bit of desperation, I reached out to friends of mine who are professional counselors. I shared my personal experience and said, what can you recommend that can help us move forward? Several of them recommended the work of Marshall Rosenberg, who was an American psychologist, a mediator, author, and teacher who passed away at 80 years old in 2015. Starting in the early 1960s, he pioneered a process called nonviolent communication to support partnerships and resolve conflict within people, in relationships, and in society. Marshall Rosenberg could be found mediating between warring tribes in Africa. He was often found in refugee camps with the Palestinians. Likewise, he was also found in the midst of families like mine who needed help to reestablish a bridge to communication. One of the biggest surprises that I learned from Marshall Rosenberg is that compliments can also be a form of violent communication. The primary point that he makes is this. If you will, for a moment, think with me back to the song that you heard this morning, right before the offertory and meditation. The song was called "See Me Beautiful." Marshall Rosenberg says, "This is what you will hear behind the words of every person you come in contact with, if you will take the time to connect with the divine energy in that person." Let me say that again. Think of the song, "See Me Beautiful." This is what you will hear behind the words of every person you come in contact with, if you will make the effort to connect with the divine energy in that person. To demonstrate this, Marshall Rosenberg uses the tools of elementary school teachers, preschool teachers. He uses puppets and simple songs like "See Me Beautiful." For language of the heart, he uses a giraffe puppet. I don't actually have a puppet. I'm house sitting for a couple that has a little dog, and so I have dog toys. I'm going to let this be the giraffe. And for the language of the intellect, or the other kind of language that's not language of the heart, he uses a jackal. I don't have a jackal, but I have something that might suffice as a form of the opposite of nonviolent communication. He begins by saying that one of the most common misunderstandings is the inability or the lack of education, having never been told that there's a difference between how people perceive of something as common as love. So he uses puppets to demonstrate. And the jackal says to the giraffe, "Do you love me?" And then giraffe says to himself that language of love is not a feeling, but a need. The jackal understands love as a feeling. So giraffe asks for clarity and says, "Do you mean, do I experience feelings of love when we're together?" "Yes, yes, yes." Well, in giraffe language, love is not a feeling. It's a need. But right now, do you need me to demonstrate that I have feelings of love for you? "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying." "Oh, okay. So even though feelings change from one moment to the other, okay, I get it. So ask me again. Do you love me? When? Right now. No. So you see how that can get mixed up really fast. Giraffes don't use love as a feeling. We use it as a need. And we can say to a person using jackal language, I'll do my best to help you. Feelings change every few seconds. How can I possibly know what I'm going to feel 10 minutes from now? I can't. A few basic concepts about nonviolent communication. One is that needs are universal. Probably the most familiar would be Maslow's hierarchy of needs that's taught to every sociology, psychology student in college. At the bottom of the pyramid are physiological needs like air, water, food, sleep, shelter, that sort of thing. Next up on the list, so once those needs are met, then a person can move toward meeting their safety needs like personal security, employment, resources, health, property. Next is love and belonging. And when I first saw this, I thought, that seems like it ought to be the top thing, but it's not. It's right in the middle. Friendship, intimacy, family, a sense of connection, community like we have here at church. I think of it this way, that in the body, the heart is sort of the center. It's the bridge between the intellect and the gut, all of which have intelligent functions. Next to the top is esteem, respect, self-esteem, recognition, strength, and freedom. And finally, at the top is self-actualization, the desire to become the most that we can be, whatever that looks like, in coordination with our gifts and abilities. An important concept to keep in mind is that needs are always internal. If I say, I want a cup of coffee right now, that's not it's a need for me because I'll go into caffeine withdrawal and get a headache. But in terms of communicating nonviolently, needs are internal. I said all humans have the same needs, so let me flip my page here. What we want is strategies for meeting this variety of needs. We have to be careful not to mix up a need with a request for meeting the need, which contains no reference to who will take action to meet the need. Here's what that means. When I say, why don't you show me more respect? Initially, I would have translated that into a need for respect. But in actuality, that's a strategy for meeting my need for intimacy or friendship or esteem. I have a need for respect. I feel like we're going to trip myself up because this is still new to me. I'm still practicing, so we're going to learn together. Most of us don't know how to express our needs. I fully agree with that. And we don't know how to hear the need behind what somebody is saying. When Marshall brought this up, he talked about a time that he went to a Palestinian refugee camp. And as soon as the attendees learned from his translator that he was an American, one man jumped up and yelled, "Assassin!" The other one yelled, "Murderer!" The other one said, "Child killer!" There had been a riot the night before that resulted in the deaths of women and children. And when they brought pictures to him to show the result of the damage, it included pictures of grenades that had the words "Made in USA" on the side. Marshall makes the statement over and over again, I don't listen to what people think. And then he even gets more specific and says, I don't listen to what people think of me. That's very difficult initially for me, because that's where the trigger happens. That's what happened to me. My son used one phrase that triggered something that had happened to me 6, 7 years ago. And I responded from anger and hurt that had nothing to do with him. But in that small window of 5 minutes of texting back and forth, I virtually blew up a 38-year relationship. My prayer is to live long enough to see it restored. And I hope this is a good start to do that. Learning how to make clear requests is important. When my son texted and said, why don't you ask me about that contract, that big contract I signed last week? And these were hypothetical questions, I thought. Why don't you ask me about, he named a daughter, her reading coach? Why don't you ask me about the other daughter's speech therapy? My response was, well, I would, except I didn't know about that. And he instantly responded, right, because we don't talk. I thought he didn't want to talk. And on and on and on. And so this is what I call Big Dipper thinking. You have tiny points of data, some from right in front of you, some from a long time ago, some from experiences, some from culture, some from family. But we have all of this data rolling around in our head. It's kind of like a pinball machine. Things just bounce around, and then they start falling through holes that quite possibly are not in the right place. And you think you're going to rack up all these points, and you find out you just went broke and lost all your money. So in an effort to keep relationships from being such a gamble, I think it's important to have tools in the toolkit. By the same token, I've often heard from other people, don't throw that psychological stuff on me. It's funny, in my opinion. It's not funny. I'm being sarcastic. I admit it. That if somebody has diabetes and they say, oh my God, I've got to completely revise the way I eat. They do that. Somebody has open heart surgery. They say, oh, I've got to completely revise my lifestyle. Somebody finds out that, or discovers from however, that they're quite possibly an alcoholic. And they hear, oh, you don't have to change anything except you have to change everything. It's daunting. But somehow I don't attach the same kind of context to physical things as I do mental things. I think if you just change your mind, if you would just behave the way I need you to behave for me to feel better, we'll be fine. If you'll just do it my way, everything will be fine. The problem is that is all focused on me and not on the needs of the other person. This is a very important point. Please hear what I'm saying and write it down if you want to. The purpose of nonviolent communication, the purpose of speaking peace, is not to get what I want. Let me say that again. The purpose of nonviolent communication is not to get what I want. It is to establish a connection so that all parties can be heard and all needs can be met. Is that an ideal? Of course it is. Is there negotiation in there? Certainly. Is there a process that works? Thankfully. And this is the encouraging part to me. It's relatively simple. And if you heard or remember anything that we talked about, probably 2 years ago now, I introduced something called a talking boundary from a place in Tulsa, Oklahoma called Green Shoe, greenshoe.org online. It's a 5-day intensive workshop that teaches about how to set talking boundaries based on codependent behavior. That's an analysis, that's a diagnosis, that's a pathology, and you will hear over and over Marshall Rosenberg steering way clear of diagnoses because that's opinion. It's not universally agreed on, but everybody recognizes in another human being when we're hungry, physically hungry. We recognize when we're cold. We recognize when we're depressed. We recognize when we need intimacy. And for me, not having touched another human being except for elbows or, quick whatever, but I basically haven't touched anybody since March. You know all the layers that we're all dealing with. These kinds of things are vital. The biggest place where Marshall Rosenberg sees the need for education is being able to describe, to identify, and to verbalize what our needs are, or how we feel. I think I'm better at describing how I feel than what I need. But until I can identify what the need is, let's say that I'm really angry, which I was when I texted my son. But I had a need to be seen and heard as the person I am today. I was selfish in my response. If I had taken 5 deep breaths, I know in my heart, I've been taught, I know, do not ever text anything you don't want on the front page of the paper. Do not communicate difficult relationship truths in 140 characters. Don't do that. And I did it. But if I broke the relationship, if it was the last straw, and this is what I got from Marshall Rosenberg, when someone reaches a point that they simply can't hear you anymore, the need behind the no contact, in some cases, is simply nothing more than for the pain to stop. Oprah Winfrey said the most important thing she learned in her 25 years of being on television is that everybody wants to be seen and heard. And when she learned about trauma-informed therapy, that trauma, childhood trauma, being up until the age of 17, is stored physically in the body, that it can be triggered, that it is part of a larger set of symptoms of a dysfunctional kind of way of dealing with things. She said that she immediately sent teachers to train her teachers for her school for girls in Africa. So many of us, we know the statistics. 1 in 4 people will be victims of sexual violence in their lifetimes. We don't know how those statistics will change moving forward after the pandemic. We don't know how many people are teetering on the edge of giving up. People in desperate situations. And those needs, in my view, seem to be sliding further and further back down the pyramid. So that instead of working on self-actualization through creativity and cooperation and companionship and those kinds of things that we discussed as the fuel for the emerging economy, first we have to be able to help people identify what their needs are. And I need to learn how to make clear requests in a simple formula that starts out with sensory data. In other words, what do I see, hear, feel, or observe? When I saw you do this, when I heard you say whatever. So that's the first step. The feeling part didn't go in there. When I saw or observed or heard, things that you could go to court and testify in first person. Yes, I had direct experience with that. What I make up about that is, now my family knows that when I say what I make up about that, there is a little bit of eye rolling because they know that I'm practicing a formula, which doesn't feel completely natural to me yet. I'm continuing to practice. What I make up about that is, and this is part of that Big Dipper thinking. If we have limited relationships, contact with someone else, and then one more thing happens, we fill in what we think that means. There is no such thing, literally, as a Big Dipper in the sky. Somebody made that up and said, if you look up there, you can see that it looks like a Big Dipper. The power of suggestion. But my brain is what fills in the diagram. And it happens like that in relationships too. Another way to express it is what I believe about that is. What that has triggered from my past is. And finally, the emotions that are generated. And about that, I'm feeling. So let's go back to the top. When I saw, heard, or observed, fill in the blank. And so let's use me. When I got that, that's a little too personal, and this is being recorded. So maybe I'll make up something else. When you said, let's go to dinner tonight, what I made up about that is that you were planning a special time for us together. And what I felt about that was excitement and eagerness to be with you and to share a midweek date. When I realized that we weren't going out to dinner, but we were going to grab a hamburger at the drive-in at Sonic, what I make up about that is you don't really think I'm worth spending the extra money to go and miss your show on television tonight just to be with me. I'm not as important as your golf match on television. So we have to do something quick so you can get back and watch TV. Now, I wouldn't say it like that out loud. I would be nice, I would be accommodating, and I would be seething on the inside. But I haven't been honest. And I haven't expressed my need. And so consequently, the person I'm speaking with doesn't have the opportunity to receive that as a gift. Our culture takes needs and puts them over into the needy category. It's weak. You're being too emotional. And so we don't have emotional maturity. We don't have emotional intelligence. Most people can identify about 5 things that they're feeling. The good news is that on the back of that card that I think dropped on the floor, here we go. On the back of the green shoe card, there are 8 basic emotions: anger, fear, pain, joy, passion, love, shame, and guilt. I want to tell you, shame and guilt ride shotgun on a lot of other stuff. And then there are 3 more for every one of those main ones. Next to anger, resentful, irritated, frustrated. I'm frustrated because I feel like that you need to be more specific with me. And do you see how I didn't express my need? I expressed a strategy that I want him to use. I have a need to feel secure that I'm appropriately dressed to be out with you. And when you said we were going out to dinner tonight, what I made up about that was that we were going to a nice restaurant. And about that, I felt excited until I heard you say that we were going to grab a burger in 15 minutes. I would prefer. Moving forward. So the last thing is a vulnerable request. Here's a little catch to that. How my request is received is partially determined on how I reacted the last time I made a request. If my requests are a way, if I measure them, if there's a reward or punishment attached to them, if my need can only be met by your behavior, I'm probably off target. Because once again, needs are universal and internal. My need can be expressed without judgment, blame, is supposed to be, guilt, obligation, and should never have a person attached to it to meet that need. A simple expression of the need without any reference to a person and without any layer of guilt, shame, judgment, or blame. Clear enough? I realize that I'm just hitting the high tops here, but there are plenty of videos on YouTube if you'll look up Marshall Rosenberg, Nonviolent Communication. What we want to do is to learn how to hear what's alive in the other person who's speaking with us. It doesn't require me to be nice, but it does require that I be more honest and more clear about how life would be better for both of us if we could find a way to meet each of our needs in a certain situation. The important elements are to make a clear observation, to express my feelings as functioning only inside me, and to express clearly what needs have not been met by the other person's behavior. I don't hear what they think. I'm listening for what needs are unmet now, and how can I meet those needs? Marshall Rosenberg, back again to the Palestinian refugee camp, recognized and was able to help both sides see that the support that they got from the United States, they didn't want more weapons. They wanted support in the form of shelter and food. And I suppose if the conversation continued longer, which it did, that we would have eventually gotten around to self-respect, esteem, relationships, community. But those basic needs have to be met first. And remembering that they are universal. When we hear people, truly hear the need behind the words, then I can respond without violence or aggression. That doesn't mean that I can't use protective force to protect myself or another person. It does mean that I can relate to someone else without judgment or blame. There are people all over the world who are learning these skills, and I believe that we can be a part of introducing them to our community in an environment where we can practice, where we can bring real life situations that are happening in our own community. I'm thinking specifically of perhaps the statue at Confederate Square would be worth a conversation in a nonviolent way so that all of our needs are met. In our individual families, I look forward to being able to share with you how the break in our relationship was mended through nonviolent communication, through talking boundaries, through mutual respect and understanding. And I think this will be a great way to start the new year. And I look forward to hearing your comments. And once again, the name is Marshall Rosenberg. The focus of his entire life was nonviolent communication. You can find it on YouTube and every other social media platform that you use. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to working with you soon.